Good morning. We continue the review of my essay called Hemshech Ayin Beis, where we are piecing together the most likely conclusion that the Rebbe Rashab would have done had he continued writing Hemshech Ayin Beis, based on what the Rebbe Rashab does write and hints to, and the questions he asks, the places he says, I will explain it later, which he doesn't end up explaining, at least not to our eyes, and coupled with Maimorim that the Rebbe Rashab based the end of Hemshech Ayin Beis, namely the Maimer Hamagbihi l'Shevis. So that's what we concluded yesterday, the Mittler Rebbe and the Alter Rebbe's version of what the answer is after the lengthy contemplation is bonus in Hashem Echad, in Achdus, Liyachde Yisbarach, Yichud Tata, Yichud Elah, and the joining combination of both, how that affects the animal soul. So the Mittler Rebbe at length and the Alter Rebbe a little briefer both discuss that. And and I quoted in this essay, we read it together. So we are now on page, and we started now the next chapter in this essay, chapter 2. So we are on page 7. And this what I'm looking at is the essay can be found on the group, the Ayin Beis group, the WhatsApp group, that is. So the next thing we covered yesterday was also the other question, the next question. The Rebbe Rashab asked the question, why is it, why is the power of the neshama? And we reviewed the fact that the Alter Rebbe called it neshama atzma, or nefesh alikis atzma, has this power. And we discussed, because the neshama is ner Hashem, the neshama itself has the properties Hashem endowed it, that is very power. It's not just carrying a power, it actually has the very power of Elikus, the Selim Elikim, that gives it the ability to, which is like a flame, constantly flickering, constantly longing, seeking, reaching up and connecting to godliness. So no matter every part of the neshama, as we read both from the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, and thus even when the neshama comes down below, and even when it's concealed inside the body and the animal soul, it retains that personality, and that gets awakened and stimulated during Shema, which in turn, therefore, the neshama itself, as it contemplates on Shema, is essentially like a fish in water. It's experiencing its very nature. And that is why the neshama itself has this power to affect the animal soul. But like we learned yesterday as well, this still comes from a koyach l'mayla, meaning the koyach of the neshama, but the neshama itself is getting it from Hashem, obviously, but it's part of the neshama's very personality. So neshama, as it comes down below, has this strength, which is very consistent, of course, with what we've been learning about eyesight, that the very eye could see. The only thing is, in this world, in a dark room, an eye needs an outside light to shine, but the eye itself sees. And once the Asadavi will come, once the world will be refined, the eye itself, the Etzem Koyach HaNeshama, the Etzem Koyach Hariyah rather, will then come forth. So today we need support from outside, but that doesn't mean that the eye itself doesn't see. He made that point very clear. He said explicitly that even though the Malachim are a siyua, they're like a support system, but they are not the ones that do the Aveda. It's the Neshama that struggles in this world with its Aveda. It's not that the Malachim are doing it. It's that the Neshama doesn't go alone. It has a support system. So that's the critical key here to understand. And that's where we are. Let's see here. As I said, page 7. So let me continue from where we left off. Actually, it's now page 8. Sorry. We already moved to page 8. Yeah. The second paragraph on page 8, which is what I'm going to read now. So now starts the next subject. What's the next subject? If you recall in the Maimer, both the Rebbe Rashab, back on page 1351, and at length in Hamagbihi l'Shevis of the Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe, both it all began by saying there's Ner Hashem Nishmasadam, but there's also Ner Mitzvah V'Teira Er. So the mitzvah is also associated with the word Ner. So the Ayin Beis, he briefly explained it back on page 1351 and 1352. But here, when it came to page 1366, where he asked the questions, he just left that as an unanswered question. What is Ner mitzvah, and what are the three components in the mitzvah? The Ner, which is the wick, the oil, and the fire, the flame. That he never gets back to. He asked the question on page 1366 and does not answer it. So now that we finished the section about affecting the animal soul, that's all about Ner Hashem Nishmasada. But a neshama doesn't come alone, as I said. It is also armed with a mitzvah, and with Ner Mitzvah and Teira Er. And that's going to be the next part of this discussion. And as I said, the Rebbe Rashab would have certainly continued, especially that's the theme of the Maimer. Let me just see here. I want to make sure I got it right. I said 1366, no, 1466, my mistake. Let me just make sure I have the pages right here. 1466. Yeah. So in 1466, you'll see he asked the questions, Ma'u inyaner mitzvah or ma'hem gimel inyanim hanal, meaning Shem and Psila and Ur. And then he goes back to Neshama, the Yichud. So if you continue the flow, after explaining the effect of Nefesh L'Kis and Nefesh Habamis, that's the Koyach and Nefesh L'Kis Atzma. So in Teira Er and the Mittel Rebbe now say, and now let's talk about Ner Mitzvah. And this too, the Rebbe Rashab does not actually state. So we're going to learn it in those Maimorim, and that way we can piece together and the puzzle of how the Rebbe Rashab most likely would have explained it. So that's the next section we're going into right now, which is the primary theme in this second chapter in my essay here. Okay, now, any questions before I continue? Just to add one more point, that this isn't just for technical information, that in addition to Neshama, there's a Ner Mitzvah and Teira Er, but as we'll see, it's all part of the central theme of Ayin Beis, which is the interface between the divine and existence. What we've learned so far is how the Neshama achieves it through Tefillah, through Shema. But the full interface, as we know, Tefillah is Mamata L'mayla. We've been learning, especially in this second half of volume 3, that Teira is Hamshacha L'mayla Lamata, and we haven't gotten to that yet. Everything we've spoken about is Mamata L'mayla. The Neshama comes down into a body and an animal soul. Using Tefillah prayer, it contemplates and comes to understand the divine unity. And in turn, the Nefesh L'Kis influences and inspires the animal soul. And in turn, the animal soul, but the interface for it to be complete has to be with the highest levels of Elikus and in the most revealed way. So now is going to come other pieces. So in addition to the Neshama and prayer, Tefillah, there's going to be mitzvahs, Ner Mitzvah, and Teira Er. And if you really want the full picture, I'll also add Tshuva, the Einoid, which we'll talk about a lot later in this essay, in this discussion. But right now, we're going into the realm of, so we're going to end up having a Neshama, Tefillah, Mitzvah, Teira, and Tshuva, like that, with Tshuva, which is like what comes from the state of distress, that the darkness itself, the Gvuras themselves are sweetened at their root. But as I said, that's a separate subject that deserves its own discussion, and it'll come at the end of this whole, because I'm going in order now, we're going in our order backwards, where we're going now into Ner Mitzvah. So here's what we say. V'ato namshich levayer hashayla be'inyan Ner Mitzvah. And now we'll continue to explain the question about Ner Mitzvah. What's the question? U'lehoven ma'u inyan Ner Mitzvah or ma hema gimel and yonim hanal. What is the inyan of Ner Mitzvah, especially in contrast to Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, the Ner of the Neshama? And what are the three things of Shem and oil, Psila, wick, and Ur, light? That's on page 1466. That's where he asked that question. So, let us read. B'tchilas ha'inyan, in the beginning of the whole this whole discussion, on page 1350, which goes back a good 116 pages to be exact. Kvar huva medrushe Hamagbihi l'sheves hanal. He already cited and brought from the Maimarim, the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimar Hamagbihi l'sheves, the one that we've earlier quoted. Hashayla mahu ner the neshama v'ner mitzvah. He already cited there the question: what is a ner shama? What is ner mitzvah? So for the complete picture, I'm explaining that we already began the discussion a while back. Umamshich levayir sham, and back there, he continued and explained: sheyesh gimel inyanim, that they're the three things: the psila of Hashem and v'er, the wick, the oil, and the light, and the flame. Hein b'ner neshama v'hein b'ner mitzvah. That these three components exist both in the soul, in the flame called the soul, and the flame called the mitzvah. And after he explained what are the three things in the soul, the content of which was cited earlier in the first chapter of this essay, Mavayir Bekitzid, he does explain in brief, B'seif Omid Aleph Shinun Beis, on the bottom of page 1351, 1352, Hagimel Inyanim B'ner Mitzvah. The three things in the Ner Mitzvah. And here's what he says. Shapsilahi HaMitzvah. The mitzvah itself is the wick. And what does that mean? That's the divine will. Because every mitzvah is a divine will. So if Hashem wants us to put on tefillin or tzitzis, those are the examples he gives there. But any example, there's the Ratzon Elyon in these physical things, that this should become a mitzvah to Hashem, that he calls the wick. The Ratzon that's mislabish and dvarm. Remember, it's not just God's will, it's God's will in a physical object, to take that object and turn that into a mitzvah. By idea mitzvahs misalim advarim agashmim. And by doing a mitzvah, let's say with the cloth, with the parchment from the animal hide, you're elevating that physical object. Just like an esrig, you elevate the esrig, a matzah, the matzah. Same with every mitzvah. V'hu, and he explains, shahagilui milmaila shebemaisa mitzvahs, that the revelation from above in the actionable mitzvahs, they take all the physical objects of this world, that initially are under the control and the governance of klippas nega. Klippas nega is the klippa, the shell, that conceals the divine within the physical existence. So when you look at the world, you don't necessarily see the divine. So it's under the control of the klippas nega. And what are you doing? You're el harihem nechlolim al yedei mitzvahs belakus. And by taking this object and dedicating it to God's will, by taking it and doing what Hashem wants you to do with it, you're actually freeing it, so to speak, from under the control of the klippa, that whose domain was under, and it's nichlol, it's encompassed in elikus. That's what a mitzvah does. It takes the physical objects of this world and elevates them, takes them out of the control of the klippas nega into the world of kedusha, into elikus. So that's what he says briefly in on page 1351, 1352. And the Rebbe Rashab on those pages in Ayin Beis adds, after that he adds, as it's also explained in Torah in this Maimon Hamagbihi, the Gam Yesh, another thing a mitzvah has, Gam Yesh ba mitzvah, another element that a mitzvah has is a Zgula Pratis. It has a unique feature, a unique quality that God embedded in a mitzvah. Lahalis is a nefesh abamis, to elevate the animal soul, and to bind it to Eidin Sof Baruch Hu. All that I just read is what it says back then back there in Ayin Beis, page 1351 and 1352. So 2 points in the mitzvah. One is it elevates the world. Second, it has ability to bind the animal soul to godliness. Those are the 2 things that he says. That's the only thing the Rebbe Rashab says in actual Ayin Beis. But later in page 1366, he goes back to it and asks the question, what is Ner Mitzvah? And what are the 3 components? So clearly the Rebbe Rashab has more to say. It doesn't suffice just for that. And that we need to depend on the Maimar Hamagbihi to know what would he have said about Ner Mitzvah more than just these 2 points we just made. So that's back summing up what we learned there. Now, I'm going to spell out what this means in the context of Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom. Because what's happening here? Clearly a mitzvah, like for example, tefillin. Tefillin is an addition to Shema and the tefillah and the prayer that we say that the neshama says, that neshama contemplates on, and the yichud of Hashem. It's an additional element. So how does that work? So this is what it means. Kolomer. This means Nesav la'aveda shel ner neshama. In addition to what we learned earlier, the work of the soul, hapsila, because there the soul, the work, the nefesh elikis is the wick. B'koyach atzma, with its own power, because that was the emphasis. B'koyach atzma, neshama can do that without a mitzvah and Torah, because neshama has the divine personality. Aideis bonus b'krishma, through contemplation in krishma, lahamshech hayichud, u'lahalis hanefesh habamis, to draw down the yichud of Hashem and to elevate the animal soul, Hashemen, the oil, lahoyer, to illuminate, v'yichlol ba'avos Hashem, and it should be consumed or absorbed and encompassed in the love of Hashem. V'havta b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha, as we learned earlier, kirish be'esh, like fiery flame, ha'oyer shenaseh aydei koloyin Hashem shenishav b'apsila. That's the flame that's created through the oil being consumed and absorbed and being drawn into the wick. So that's a standalone. So neshama, the wick, draws the oil and creates the fiery love, the fire. So in addition to that, nitna l'neshama l'mayla ner mitzvah. In addition to that, the neshama was given from above a mitzvah. Mitzvahs are not initiated by us. We initiate the performance of the mitzvah, but the mitzvah itself was given to us mamayla. Sha'idei ha-mitzvahs. These are the haratzon elyon hamislabish bedvarim hagashmim. Through these mitzvahs that manifest within the physical objects, like we learned earlier, 2 things happen. Misalim advarim hagashmim nechlolim belakus. The physical things get elevated and they get encompassed in elikus. So a davar shel choil, a mundane piece of matter, will become part of godliness through doing a mitzvah. And 2, v'gam yesh b'hem zgula pratis, the second point, the unique feature that the mitzvah has, lahalis es nefesh habamis l'kasher be'ed ein sof baruch. So this is the point, that in addition to the neshama's work on its own through davening, now in our mitzvah gives it additional power, number 1, to elevate the world. That was not said earlier about in davening. In davening, the focus was on the animal soul. And the second thing is that the mitzvah also helps with the animal soul. Ubeloshen hemshech, in the language of the Hemshech Ayin Beis, what's the loshen? The top of page 1352. Ha-mitzvahs heina machabrim es eir ha-teire ima odom v'ha-olam. That's the actual language of the Rebbe Rashab. That mitzvahs connect the eir ha-teire, which we'll talk about later, the light of Teira, with what? With the Adam, the person, including the Nefesh Habamis, Va'elam, and the world. These 2 things, the Dvarim Gashmi of the world, and the Zgula Pratis, the unique feature and quality it has to bind an animal soul to godliness. Okay. So now we see the context, what Ner Mitzvah is coming to add to the whole picture. I'm going to go further, even more analysis here, because here's the question: does the neshama through davening, does it affect the world, or only the nefesh habamis? based on what we're saying here, it sounds like the Ner Mitzvah has the unique quality to affect the world because davening and Shema is not with physical objects. It's true, tefillah is a mitzvah, but it's not like tefillin that's using, let's say, the parchment, or tzitzis, the wool of a sheep, or a matzah, which is a physical matzah, or an esrog, or a lulav. And the same thing with all the mitzvahs that we do. There are mitzvahs that are not physical objects, like Ava and Yira, but we're talking about Dvarim Gashmi. So you could argue that maybe tefillah only affects the Nefesh HaBamis and not so much the world around. I'm going to address that in the next paragraph. But before we go there, I'll stop if there are any questions.
So what about the mitzvah? Is it affecting everything 24 hours or like tefillah, during tefillah?
Well, we know that it says in Tanya, Yichud zeh hu nitzchi l'mayla la'elam vod. So when you do a mitzvah, you release a yichud that is forever. The question is, if you see it in this world, or you see the effect, that depends. Depends on the person, depends on the situation. In general, it says, it's like munach bekufsa. The energy that is generated by the mitzvah is like placed in a chest. And when Mashiach comes, and it's like what it says, Meisif Eidos Batzilus. And then it accumulates, and then when my Seinu Vavadesenu accumulates to the point when the Geula comes, all that will be revealed. So the answer is, every mitzvah affects the world forever. Not necessarily in a revealed way. That's what you're asking.
Well, in addition to that, the tefillah makes
for example,
it
when you
also
say
in
that
a revealed way.
When something becomes a chefza shel kedusha, like let's say a chefza shel mitzvah, I should say, like a sefer Torah, tefillin, mezuzahs, no matter what, even if they're apostle, you can't throw them out. You have to bury them. So you see there right away that the kedusha never goes away. Kedusha le zozim im kema. The thing is, with our physical eyes, you and I may not be able to see it. But al pi halacha, al pi Torah, the mitzvah is affected, the object is forever. You know, this is part of what the Ragat Shover speaks about, the Chaim Brisker, making a chefze gashmi into a chefze shel mitzvah, or to the point even like, say, bris milah, the three aspects, the poel, pu'ula, and nifel, that's a constant process, a pu'ula nimshachas. This is a bigger discussion. But bottom line, a mitzvah is not a temporary moment thing.
So from the words that you said just now, we see that in this effect is like you said, you see it or you don't see it, but tefillah, you see it. At least part of it, you feel it.
Yeah, but tefillah, you could also argue the other way, because it's not a gashmizdik thing. After davening, like he says in Tanya Chezer V'nir, the Nefesh HaBamis comes back in full force. So tefillah is more be'es rotzen, like he says in Perikut Beis, during the time of tefillah, lav dafka that has a pula throughout the day. It could have, and there should be a reshim that remains, but not quite like a mitzvah. Like for example, once you dedicate an object to become tefillin or mezuzah or sefer Torah or other mitzvahs, it's forever. It's not just during the time when you do the mitzvah.
But at the same time, he said there are two pieces.
This is not so relevant to our discussion in this piece here, but that's the point. Obviously, the goal is always to have a permanent effect. The question is how obvious it is and how much effect it actually has.
But about which is Negea Yoshol Yonenu is saying that the effect of the neshama is in two ways: in tefillah and in general.
Who said that? I didn't say that. No, right now the neshama is also only on the person. It's the mitzvah that affects both. We're now going to discuss.
Yeah. I'm talking about the
next paragraph. I'm going to talk about what is the effect of a neshama. Let's continue. You'll see where it goes now. Right now, it's based on the Torah Eir and the Ayin Beis. Mitzvah affects two things: the Adam and the Elam. Tefillah did not say the Elam. He said the Adam, yes. Well, let's now, in this next paragraph, I'm going to address this issue directly. So let's continue.
So what is the oilom? What is the effect from the mitzvah of the oilom?
It takes a klaf tefillin, the hide of the animal. matzah, tzemer. That's gashmis elam. The mitzvah is affecting the physical. It's aligning the physical world with Ratzon Elyon. The Eibishter wants to use that semer or that klaf for a mitzvah.
Thank you.
Yeah, but okay. Yesh lahavir. We need to clarify something here. Shegam neshama atzma, aideis bonus bekrishma, that also the neshama itself, through the contemplation in Shema, miyachedes elikus be'elam, also unites the divine with existence. The point of when you say Hashem, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, we're not just talking about the body and the animal soul. We're saying Echad, that the whole world, Echad, is connected to Elikus. So even though before we were speaking about mitzvah, these two aspects, we have to clarify that through Shema, the neshama also is miyached Elikus with existence. Nesiv lepulosa ba'nefesh habamis. In addition to its effect on the animal soul. Kimavur le'el ba'hemshech, like it was explained earlier in the Ayin Beis, page 1417 and on, be'in ha'mayrich be'echad. There we discussed about the mayrich be'echad, extending, saying echad, that whole contemplation of echad. What we learn, amlichte l'maylo l'mato l'dal l'druchis, that you're crowning God, you're appointing God as king over the existence, l'mayla, above and below, and the dal ruchis in all four directions. Like echad is aleph, ches, dalet. Ches is zayin, rekim, and aretz, the seven heavens and earth, and dalet ruchis elam, the four east, west, north, and south. So clearly, Hashem echad and Shema is associating godliness to existence. So it's clearly a yichud of elam and elikus, not just nefesh habamis and elikus. So what is the point that the Maimonim are saying here, that mitzvahs have this effect on the world? There, it's more the Shema. You are recognizing and revealing the divine unity in all of existence. But you're not taking existence itself and aligning it with God's will. A mitzvah does that. You take the physical objects. So essentially, a mitzvah combined with Shema and Tefillah, obviously it's on a higher level. Like the parchment of tefillin or the wool of tzitzis. And that's a higher level of yichud than that which a neshama does on its own. That's why a neshama needs mitzvahs. So this is going to be discussed a lot later in this essay. I'm going to discuss this more detail later in the essay when we talk about what mitzvahs add to the neshama, what neshama adds to the mitzvahs, what Torah adds to mitzvahs, what mitzvahs add to Torah. There's a whole section, I believe it's probably chapter 5, if I recall correctly, how each one complements the other. Here we're talking about it briefly. So bottom line, they have to say that, because what's the point of bringing what's the point? Why does a neshama need a mitzvah if we could accomplish it without a mitzvah? So clearly mitzvahs, and this is very fundamental, mitzvahs add a whole dimension because it actually enters into the physical world. And that is the addition, and the yichud is higher than through a neshama tzaratzme. If you want to see more details about this, in chapter 23 in Tanya, he talks about it, the yichud of Eivarin, the malka of mitzvahs, and Araisa v'kudsha b'richa kul achad. In addition to the neshama's connection to God, the mitzvah adds more to it. And as I said, we'll talk about this a lot more later. Here, I'm just wanted to qualify that we shouldn't come away with the impression that neshama in Shema does not have any connection to the world. Of course it does. But the mitzvah, it adds a whole other dimension. And I continue explaining this. The Teira Eir Sham, Alter Rebbe and Teira Eir, Madish Beikir Inyan Habeis. Oh, one second. Let me stop here a second. Any questions before I continue?
The mitzvahs could be done only al yedei haneshama, even though that the mitzvahs is changing the gashmius, but not a neshama cannot do mitzvahs.
Here the discussion is what the mitzvahs add, not what they need in neshamas, what they add to the neshama.
Yeah. I didn't ask. I just remember.
Yeah. The Teira Ersham, now we continue. In Teira, the Alter Rebbe emphasizes the two aspects we just spoke about, that the mitzvah affects the person and the world. He says that the Alter Rebbe emphasizes primarily the second thing. Hasgula pratis b'mitzvahs lahalis hanefesh habamis or lekashra be'erein sev baruch hu. The unique feature or quality of a mitzvah, of mitzvahs, to elevate the animal soul and bind it to erein sev baruch hu. V'atam b'pashtus hu l'cheda. And the obvious reason why he emphasizes point number 2 more than its effect on the world is l'cheda ki ikad techen adrushu, because the main theme of this mimer hu ashpas hanefesh alikis al nefesh habamis is the influence and effect of the nefesh alikis on nefesh habamis. That's the whole point that he begins the whole mimer in Hamagbihi l'sheves, how the divine soul affects the animal soul. They're both opposites. And the animals and the divine soul trains and tames and harnesses the animal soul. Through the contemplation in Shema that leads to v'hafta with both sides of the heart. That's the main focus in Teira Er. So that's why his main emphasis is its effect on the animal soul. Hemshech Ayin Beis. And in the continued explanation in the Maimer, Masbir al Tam, according to this, he explains the reasons Shalevshin Talus Utfilin Kedem Atfila. So the next section in the Maimer Hamagbihi, he explains the reason why do you put on Talus and Tefillin before davening? Because if Tefillah accomplishes the yichud of the influence on the nefesh habamis, why do you need talus and tefillin? She explains lahamshich b'chinas makiv shel mitzvahs lahalis is a nefesh habamis b'tefillah, because the mitzvah is makiv that shema and the neshama don't have on its own. So by putting on talus and tefillin, you're being mamshich the makiv of these mitzvahs that helps empower the ability to elevate nefesh habamis in davening. So it's true. The neshama, the nefesh alikis in tefillah is going to elevate and affect the animal soul. But putting on talus and tefillin, he explains, adds an additional makif that gives you power to achieve that. He actually gives the example of a slingshot, that if you want to shoot a stone far, you can throw it with your hand. But if you take a lavush, like a slingshot, which is like it's essentially an instrument, it could propel it a lot further. He gives that example in the Maimer of how Gashmis, or the mitzvahs, have the power to propel the nefesh alikis in its effect on nefesh habamis a lot more than it would do on its own. That's what he says there. The power of the makif, of the makifim. Hainu shahad goshehi al mashe shemesif ha-mitzvahs, extra mem here. Therefore, we see the emphasis here is not the effect on the world, but what it adds, how the mitzvahs add to the work of the neshama, be'esat tefillah lahalis hanefesh habamis. So though the mitzvah does affect the world, like we said, because it's made of the physical world, but the main focus in the Maimer is its effect on the Veda of the neshama, influencing the nefesh habamis, to elevate the nefesh habamis, because that's the focus here. But when you look later in the Maimer, and the explanation of the Maimer, the Alter Rebbe, it's understood that the mitzvahs also affect the refinement of the world. And this is actually literally this is actually explained directly in the Maimer, the same Maimer, the Maimer of the Mitzvah Rebbe, the elaborate Maimer of the Mitzvah Rebbe on page 400 and 401. Okay, so what I focused on this paragraph was number one, was that the main focus in Teira Er is on the effect on tefillah, the mitzvah's effect on davening, as it affects the animal soul. Nevertheless, and that's why he put on talis and tefillin before davening. Nevertheless, he does address also the fact that it refines the world. So that just gives a little more context to the topic. In the brackets, I add this Seder Aveda B'Protius. The specific details, the order, what comes first. Be'im haner mitzvah ba lifnei or la'achri Aveda dener Hashem. Does the ner mitzvah come before or after ner Hashem? Because on one hand, you put on talis and tefillin before davening. On the other hand, most mitzvahs are done after davening. So that will be explained Yizboyer Mitzvah Hashem lahalom b'peidik dalet shala arazu. In chapter 4 of this essay, we'll discuss that. Not explaining that here. We'll discuss that later. The order, what comes first, mitzvah, tefillah, and so on. Okay, any questions?
When we say the mitzvah elevate the world, does it mean that the neshama elevate nefesh through elevating the world also? Like not direct elevation, but through...
Neshama, you need someone to do the mitzvah. The person...
Yes, I mean, every mitzvah elevated the world, yes. And,
but you need someone that does the mitzvah. That's the neshama and the guf, the soul and the body. He performs the mitzvah.
Okay, so this is a
mitzvah does not do itself. Mitzvah needs to be activated by somebody.
It's a direct influence. I mean, indirect influence by elevating the world. Doesn't it elevate?
I not understand what you're saying. When a person lights a Shabbos candle, or does another mitzvah, they give charity. So the person, through the mitzvah, is elevating the world and refining it.
What's going on with the animal soul at this time? It's elevating.
Well, if a person doing the mitzvah, I mean, it's animal soul is also participating. He doesn't discuss that here. You're not talking about during prayer right now, right?
Yes, we're talking about the mitzvah.
So it doesn't address that here. Here he talks about primarily prayer, then putting on talis and tefillin and other mitzvahs contribute. But obviously when a person, especially if he prayed, the real effect of the animal soul is during prayer, because you're actively working with your animal soul and refining it. But obviously when a person does a good deed, the animal soul is also participating. It's also being trained. That goes without saying. But that, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Now he's going to discuss, now to understand the exact addition of Ner Mitzvah. Remember, the question in Ayin Beis was, what is Ner Mitzvah? And the context is, in addition to Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, what does Ner Mitzvah add? And what are the three components? So now he's going to explain what is Ner Mitzvah, and we're going to actually read the full text, or at least a section of the text in Ayin Beis, in Torah Er from the Alter Rebbe. And this is the actual language in the Alter Rebbe's Torah Er. This candle or flame of the mitzvah, what is that? Hisha mitzvah yeshlos gula pratis la'alis nefesh habamis lekashra be'erein sev baruchu, like we read earlier. The mitzvah has a unique quality or unique feature to elevate and bind the animal soul to Erein Sof. Kamaimer, Asher Kedushan b'mitzvah Sof. So what do we say when we make a bracha on mitzvahs? Asher, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvah Sof. The one, Eibishter, who sanctified us b'mitzvah Sof. That means he gave us a level of sanctity through the mitzvahs that we don't have on our own. That's what he's going to explain now. The Kedesh Ha'elyon, Shulamayla min ishtalshlus. So a neshama obviously is a chelik elikam mal mamish, and it's divine. But there's clearly, when you say Asher Kedushanim Mitzvah, it means when I say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, blessed is you, God, that sanctified us with mitzvahs means more than the sanctity that I have on my own, obviously. So what is that Kodesh? He says that's a Amshacha from Kodesh Elyon, that's L'mayla min Ishtalshlus. So though the neshama comes also from a very high place, and even higher than Torah and mitzvahs, as we shall learn, but when it comes down below, the neshama doesn't have it revealed. A mitzvah is being mamshich a level from higher than Ishtalshlus. That's the chiddush of Matan Torah. Before Matan Torah, the mitzvahs were not given yet. Besides mitzvahs milah, the mitzvahs were done einam mitzvah ve'esa. The oves, the patriarchs and the matriarchs did mitzvahs, but they were not commanded to do them. And they did them more spiritually than physically in many cases. So what was the chiddush of Matan Torah? That Hashem gave us. Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. Says El Yenim Yardu Lamata. That God gave a power from higher than Ishtalshlus. As you probably have learned many times, that before Matan Torah there was a Gzeira that separated between the above and below. So spirit and matter could not fully be fused and integrated. By Matan Torah it says the Eibishter came down and brought down the power from higher than Ishtalshlus into Ishtalshlus. In different areas, that's Asher Kedushanim Mitzvah B'Tzivanu, that we're bringing Kodesh Elyon of the L'mayla min Ishtalshlus. That's the addition of a mitzvah that a dafka ner mitzvah has. Ki mitzvahs hem levushin. Mitzvahs are called garments. Like a mitzvah, a mitzvah you don't consume internally, says in Tanya. When you study Torah, you're understanding it, you're internalizing it. A mitzvah is always on, let's say, tefillin is put on the arm. A candle you light outside of you. You're adorning the person with mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are called levushim, v'nikra levush malchus. V'nikraim levush malchus. They're called a kingly robe, a kingly garments. But just shehem b'chinas makifim, because mitzvahs are the level of makifim. Shemakifim umalbishim es nefesh mereisha v'ad ragla. That's what a mitzvah does. When you do a mitzvah, you get encompassed by the mitzvah from head to toe, like putting on a garment. Now, you see this obviously in a mitzvah like sukkah. We'll soon talk about talis. You wrap yourself in a talis or a sukkah. You're surrounded by the sukkah. But in truth, all mitzvahs, in some ways, when you're doing the mitzvah, you're letting the mitzvah, so to speak, wrap you or encompass you. Es Hashem mamish, to be bound in the bond of life of Hashem Himself. So when a person binds himself, puts on a garment, a kingly garment, what happens? What's the benefit of the coveted, a beautiful garment? The garment elevates and dignifies and gives honor to the person wearing the garment. So when you don't put on, when you do a mitzvah, the mitzvahs adorn essentially and elevate the person to a higher level. You see this by tefillin, for example, when it says, "V'ro kol ha'amei ha'oretz ki shem Hashem Elokecha nikra lecha v'yarim imecha," that all the nations of the world will see that the name of God is upon you. Tefillin shel rosh v'yarim imecha, and they will be afraid of you. Why? Because they see something that is kingly. They see something that is awe-inspiring. So bottom line is, that's what mitzvahs are. That through that elevates the nefesh. So the Alter Rebbe, in his classic style, uses the physical example. When a person has a garment, you can draw him, you can pull him through with the garment. It means you can elevate him. So the garment becomes an additional, you can call it additional reinforcement, an additional element that helps elevate a person. You want to lift somebody up. If they have a garment, it's easier to lift them up. V'chein kitzreid even b'mirgama. This is a slingshot. The same thing when you bind a stone in a slingshot. So a slingshot's like a garment. It's made of a piece of hide and with like a rubber stretch. You put a stone in there. The stone could be thrown that far, but with a slingshot, you can pull back and shoot it a lot farther. So all this shows that a levush adds to be milas, to elevate something. Like very simply put, if you want to throw an object and you use an instrument, you can throw it a lot farther. The instrument here is the mitzvahs. So the mitzvahs are providing levushim of the Ratzon and Elyon that Hashem is saying, here, let me give you something of my own. I'll give you my mitzvah, my tefillin, my candle lighting, my Shabbos, whatever it may be. I'll stick to physical mitzvahs. These things will be assets that will help you elevate and grow much more than you could on your own. And hence is going to help elevate the nefesh habamis, like he said, the zgula. By binding it in the charat is in the pocket of the slingshot, you're able to throw it much farther, much higher than had you not had this instrument, this garment. Haklal, bottom line, the rule is shekol b'chinas makiv hu alo l'mayla. Every level of makif that we receive elevates something higher. That's the point of a makif. It's not a pnimi. A pnimi is when you internalize it. A makif remains outside of you like a garment, but that garment helps elevate something to a place it could not reach on its own. Olachein, now he explained, loifshin talus tefillin, that's why we put on a talus and tefillin, kedem atfillah, before davening. Lahamshe b'chinas makif l'mayla, in order to draw the makif to above, la lahales as nefesh habamis b'tefillah, in order to elevate the nefesh habamis in davening, being that the tefillah is elevating the animal soul, by putting on talus and tefillin before, it's serving like that hamshachas hamakif through the levushei hamitzvahs that help elevate the animal soul. Keneda, as it's known, next page 9, she'ena tachten elu lamayla, that something from below does not elevate. Ad sheyired tchila ha'orim l'mayla. If you want to elevate something from below, you have to wait till something from above comes and helps lift it up. So it's true. There are times as Susa de Latata you could have an initiative generated from below, but he's saying here clearly the rule. If you really want to elevate, you need something from above that's like extending an invitation to you. When Hashem says to Moshe, Amar Alei, go up on the mountain, it was when Hashem said, Vayered Hashem, God went down, reaches down to you. So if someone wants to elevate you up, they reach down to you, and you grab their hand, and then they elevate you up. That's the real process of halah. Does it mean that you can climb a bit on your own? You could. And Ayin Beis he actually talks about two ways of reaching upward, but you're never going to climb as high as when somebody above reaches and pulls you and helps pull you up. So it's a combination that you first have to have the skill ha'arim al-maila, and that helps someone climb upward. V'atfilah hi aliyas nefesh habamis. Prayer is the elevation of the animal soul, as we've been learning the Shema. Ulechin atfilah hi. Okay, let me stop for a moment. Liyas nefesh habamis, and then he's going to say, and putting on talus and tefillin before tefillah is the levush, that the makif, that's hamshachas hamakif, to help elevate the tefillah and the elevation of the animal soul. Okay. Any questions before I continue?
It occurred to me, I just had this thought, and you've said it before, actually, perhaps in connection with this, or maybe just coincidentally, but I think it was you were quoting Einstein saying that if you want to solve,
you can't solve a problem from within the system it was created, right?
Yeah. So the neshama can help, but if you really want to help the neshama leap out of its turmoil, if you will, or its station, that you need some help from outside of the system.
Yeah, that fits. That works. And as I've said a number of times, the more help we can get, the better it is, because it's a challenge no matter what.
Yeah.
Look, at the end of the day, it's going to be an eloquent, what I call triangle between neshama, Torah, and tefillah, or neshama, Torah, mitzvahs, and tefillah. It's all going to come together, neshama and tefillah, and Torah, and mitzvah and Torah. They all join together in helping achieve the interface, which is the central theme of Ayin Beis, of Chassidus in general, of Torah. So we say, Ashlesh Dvarim Ha'elam Eimed, the three pillars, Torah, Vedic, Milas Chasadim. Milas Chasadim is like mitzvahs. So the truth is, you need all three, and as we continue reading this and studying this, you'll see how each one complements the other. They really become a really very powerful picture. So it's a real piecing together. So it's more than just piecing together the end of Ayin Beis. You actually come away understanding why would the Ayin Beis have to talk about all this in the first place? Because it's all part of the interface. The first part, that's why I read earlier the summary, over 500 pages about tefillah, Lamat L'mayla. Then he goes to Torah, and now we're talking about mitzvah, and we're talking about tefillah, which really goes together with neshama. So they're all coming together. It's not just answer to the questions about ner mitzvah, but actually all pieces in creating the interface between divine and existence. So, for example, the neshama from below, so it's on our terms. But mitzvah now is introducing something l'mayla, like you just said, outside of the system, outside of Ishtalshalos. That's helping, has the Zgula Miyachedes, the special feature to help elevate the animal soul. So we're not alone. In addition, we have, of course, the siyua, the support of the malachim and the Einei Ha'eda and the Sanhedrin and the leaders and the Torah in general. So it's all part of an unbelievable approach to life, that you have your own tools, and the neshama atzma. Remember, we emphasize the neshama itself is the eye that sees. However, in the world and challenges that we have, we're getting all this support, or we're actually getting the siyua. Here he's not calling it siyua. Here he's calling it the makif that helps elevate the nefesh habamis in tefillah. So keep all that in mind. What I just said is vital, because it's all ultimately part of the whole story. Not just, as I said, obviously we're going to get the questions answered, but we're also going to get the picture that the Rebbe Rashab really would have wanted us to get at the end of Ayin Beis. So we have a full tool chest, if you wish, and blueprint of how we connect the interface between us and God.
Do women have a proven to a talus a marker where they are so high that they don't need it, or they have is it the bias, or what is it? If there is.
Well, generally speaking, anything that anybody all these levels are achievable by every Jew, for that matter, every person really on their level, man, woman, and so on. Just like a woman is not circumcised. Command the miladam, she has that already by just her very being has it. So are there things the woman has naturally? There are things that are mitzvah, let's say zman grama, connected more to time. The question is, for example, what is the women have a mitzvah to daven in general? Before, let's not even talk about talus and tefillin. So there are different opinions on this matter. Now, everybody has a mitzvah to daven when you're in need and connect. And therefore women have that as well, because that's part of the connection. Do they need the makifim of talus and tefillin? Clearly not, because they have makifim other ways, in things that they do or their very life. You have to remember, a woman is a very different entity than a man. A woman carries a child 9 months. She is involved in the bearing of the children in ways that men are not. That gives her power too. So she has her own strengths. So you have to just see it as different people have different aspects. Just like a Kohen has mitzvahs that a Yisrael doesn't. And the same thing with a Kohen Gadol or a Levi and so on. So different parts of the nation each have their different roles. But the concept of talus and film, they for sure have the idea of levushim that give them more power to be able to achieve what they have to achieve. Absolutely. Bottom line is nobody is deprived. Nobody is missing out. Just talk about tefillin, for example. So so it says that women don't put on tefillin, right? Okay. The question is why? If binding the mind and the heart, why doesn't a woman bind her mind and her heart? So here's an interesting question. Why don't we put on tefillin on Shabbos? If tefillin is such a big mitzvah that connects us this makif that he's saying here, why don't we put it on Shabbos? So the answer is because Shabbos has two oasis. We already have two signs. Shabbos itself is instead of tefillin. That's the answer the Gemara gives. And you don't add any. You don't need to add extra. Now a woman is Shabbos. Shabbos Malchusa, the queen, the Shabbos queen. She's Malchus. In the 7 days of the week, the Malchus, the feminine, is Shabbos. So a woman 7 days a week is the level of tefillin itself, just like Shabbos is the level of tefillin. Most people are not aware of that. So it's not due to actually a missing something. They actually are. They embody Shabbos. So they embody the power of tefillin. Same idea why we don't blow shofar on Shabbos when Rosh Hashanah is Shabbos, because Shabbos itself is mamshich, what the shofar is. And so on. Okay. I think I'm going to stop here simply because the next section needs a little more explanation. So I'm literally on line 1 of page 9 in this essay. Yeah. We'll stop here. Good place to stop. Are there any other questions? Okay, interesting stuff, right? Good. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. Top of page 9. Everybody be well. Let me stop the recording.